Max, thank you so much for letting me use your wonderful studio, man. This is awesome.
Thanks for coming out. Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's a brand new studio too, so I hope nothing falls off the ceiling.
It's got that brand new smell. I love it.
It's got a brand new studio. So
okay, look, you've been a science journalist for a number of years now. I said to you before, I think you've got one of the most balanced opinions online. You're not like binary. You're not like pure carnivore. You're not pure plant-based. I think you see the sort of nuance in all these different conversations. So I think what would be a really good conversation today between me and you is discussing some of the biggest nutrition controversies online.
Fun.
And just talking through the pros, the cons, the arguments on both sides, and where you stand and where I stand on that. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Sick. All right, let's dive into seed oils.
Oh my God. Wow, straight into the deep end.
Right into the deep end.
Oh,
so
man.
I'll set the scene for folks who haven't sort of come across seed oils before. So seed oils are a very big topic online. They're basically defined as like a vegetable oil that is produced by either cold pressing the seed or the nut. There's an expeller method as well, which is under pressure. And then also there's the use of solvents like hexanes to extract the oil, which is quite hard to get from the seed itself. And there are a whole bunch of other processes that are required in certain cases to get the oil from the seed originally. This differs from fruit oils like olive oil and avocado. And then also other types of cooking fats like ghee or beef tallow, or even coconut oil is a different sort of oil. So now we've set the scene of seed oils. Why do people have so much beef with seed oils?
No pun intended, right? Well, because there's this polarity in the discussion where you'll see many on social media either claim that seed oils are the root cause of all of the problems that we're seeing in the Western world, from obesity to heart disease to cancer. You know, you can just rattle off the list of chronic conditions that some will attribute seed oil exposure to. And then you've got many, often in the quote unquote evidence-based community, that portray seed oils as not just benign, but totally beneficial to health, and oils that we should actually be seeking to actively include in our diets. Mm-hmm. And to set the stage, seed oils are a fairly novel food ingredient. Seed oils, the way that we, colloquially discuss them, didn't exist in the human food supply prior to about 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And to be clear on what it is that we're referring to when we say colloquially seed oils are not a monolith. Sure. So the seed oils in question, to be clear, are what the food industry actually refers to as RBD oils. So these are oils that have been refined, bleached, and deodorized. Okay. And so the oils in question typically are canola oil. In the UK, you call it rapeseed oil, I believe. Soybean oil, corn oil, there's grapeseed oil, there's sunflower oil. And generally, these oils are highly marketed. So you'll see ads on television for them. You'll see them typically in the supermarket in plastic bottles adorned with, in the US, we have the red heart check logo giving, signifying an endorsement by the American Heart Association. And these oils, even among the RBD seed oils, a seed oil isn't quite a seed oil. They're not a monolith either. So we have oils that are predominantly monounsaturated fat. We have, seed oils that are predominantly polyunsaturated fat. The sort of halo, the health halo that surrounds them, that they all typically have in common is that they're low in saturated fat. Yeah. So compared to animal source fats, they are low in saturated fat, which in many will lead to at the very least, a small reduction in comparison to saturated fats in LDL-C.
Sure.
For example.
Which is low density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is a measure that we use as a cardiovascular risk profile, risk marker. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's true that, seed oils when consuming seed oils compared to, for example, beef tallow or coconut oil, typically, in a randomized controlled trial, it might show a reduction in LDL-C, right? Yeah. But to me, that's a false dichotomy. It's like not an either or proposition for most people. Like to me, I'm not making a choice between using seed oils or using butter. You could either choose to use seed oils or not use seed oils.
Yeah.
The primary issue with them is that they are extracted from the plant, the whole food matrix, the plant matrix. Like you'll never find fresh soybean oil because that doesn't exist. Like soybean oil doesn't arrive on the shelf after soybeans have been pressed to extract their oil. These oils have to be refined, extracted often using harsh chemical solvents like hexane. And I know a lot of people will fearmonger hexane, which is a neurotoxin. Very low residues are found in the end product, if any at all. So that's not the concern. The primary concern is that the seed oils that are primarily polyunsaturated are the most chemically unstable. They're the most prone to a form of chemical degradation called oxidation. Now, I'm not a chemist, but oxidation is a form of chemical rot that you can't necessarily see. When you slice an apple and you leave it out on the counter and it turns brown, I mean, that's oxidation at work. It's essentially a form of rust that happens to foods. And this is occurring to seed oils when exposed to light, heat, and oxygen. And that process, and that occurs with all fats, but it occurs most readily to these polyunsaturated fat-dominant seed oils. And that process is accelerated when exposed to, as I mentioned, heat. But particularly in, for example, the restaurant setting or the food processing setting, the chronic heating and in particular the reheating of these fats. And so the fats can oxidize, which is essentially, again, them being damaged. And also, so that can generate free radicals. And then as a byproduct of oxidation, these aldehyde chemicals are generated, like 4-hydroxynonenal and acrolein and all these other nasty compounds that we know are just not beneficial to human health. They've been associated with cancer and stuff like that. Now, among the RBD seed oils, some are quote unquote better than others. Some are more chemically stable than others. So high oleic sunflower oil, which is often used in ultra-processed foods, is really not that bad because it has a chemical profile similar to, a fatty acid profile similar to, avocado oil. But the concern is that when you're consuming, oils that are more polyunsaturated in nature, they have more double bonds like soybean oil or corn oil, that you're essentially consuming damaged fats, which over time can damage you. Now, human trials don't really bear that out. So that's where the confusion occurs. That there's not a lot of human data to show that these oils are actually all that harmful. A lot of people will say that they're inflammatory. Well, the human randomized control trials don't necessarily show an increase in inflammatory markers. But the science is not settled. And so that's where people who have a broader understanding of biochemistry are like, wait a minute, but these oils are still, you're still generating these noxious compounds, including trans fats, which all of these oils have to some degree when they're exposed to that deodorization step in the RBD process. So I think that it's justified to be cautious when consuming them, particularly in the quantities that people are now consuming them today. 100 years ago, the primary fat in a person's diet was primarily of animal origin. Like 90%, something like 90% of the fats that a person would consume in the United States came from animal source foods. Today, the vast majority of fats are coming from these ultra-processed oils, usually by way of ultra-processed foods. We know that ultra-processed foods are not beneficial, right? But the question still remains, like, what is the chronic overconsumption of these fats doing to our health? And the jury is still out. We do know that they do seem to positively impact surrogate markers like LDL, right? But we don't know necessarily. We know that LDL is associated with cardiovascular risk and all that, but we still don't know essentially what these oils are doing over the long term, and also to other organ systems like to our brains. And that's my primary area of concern because my mom had dementia. And there's a really good paper written by Taha, and there are other researchers that are exploring the concerns in a really rigorous way, like Ramsden. People can look up papers by Taha, Ramsden, and others that are showing that, or at least suggesting that these kinds of fats, when overconsumed, are not doing our brain health any favors. So I just think it warrants a little bit of skepticism, and also from the pragmatic side, the most robust evidence as a health beneficial oil to use in the kitchen is for extra virgin olive oil. So when given the choice, I know it could be cost prohibitive potentially, but extra virgin, it's like, to me, it doesn't make any sense why one would choose, just when viewed through the lens of the precautionary principle alone, why anybody would choose to use one of these RBD seed oils over extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah. I love how you've set the scene there, because I think that's really important to sort of provide context and balance to both sides. And I agree with the precautionary principle. And I think, if I was to play devil's advocate, people could also use that same precautionary principle against sort of eating animal products as well. We know, like, when we cook animal products, meat and fats, you can get polyaromatic hydrocarbons formed. We know that can be inflammatory, and actually it's kind of why that, even though I eat animal-based products and fish and red meat, occasionally all the rest of it, I always make sure to combine that with herbs and spices and greens and all these other anti-inflammatory products to sort of like mitigate against that. And then I also use things like, extra virgin olive oil as well. I think that can be used again in the same way against eating animal products for the same reasons, right? It's potentially inflammatory. We actually know that it is inflammatory when you consume it alone, and it's not in the context of like a more balanced diet. So using the same analogy, people might say, well, as long as you're having vegetables and as long as your food is of a Mediterranean pattern with nuts and seeds and vegetables, then you don't really need to worry about the potential inflammatory profile of these oils. And some of those arguments are sort of hyped up.
Yeah, I mean, my I guess response to that would be the part of the definition of the precautionary principle to me is that the longer a food or a product has been, that humans have been exposed to it,
sure,
the less caution we need to use. Which isn't to say that all things that are natural are safe. That's certainly not true. But these RBD oils they're novel again. Like these are a byproduct of the food industry. I mean, they were initially engineered to be used as engine lubricants, which is not to say that they shouldn't be consumed.
Yeah.
But like take grapeseed oil. Grapeseed oil was like, that's a byproduct of the wine industry. Like they would use grapes to create wine, and then they would throw out the seeds. When one industrious entrepreneur realized you could actually press these oils, press the seeds, extract the the oil, and then run it through myriad industrial processing steps. And now we see grapeseed oil being used in everything from granola bars to salad dressings. I just think it's, and speaking of salad dressings, that is the primary vehicle, right, of most people's exposure to these oils. It's because we use oil in salad dressing, and it's very cost effective to make a commercial salad dressing utilizing one of these oils as opposed to extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
And so that to me is also kind of illustrates where some of the pitfalls of observational research that seems to show that higher levels of consumption of these fats seems to be associated with better health. Well, there's healthy user bias there, because one of the primary routes of ingestion is by way of salad dressing. So for somebody who's regularly eating salads and using these fats, well, they might be more inclined to take a multivitamin or exercise, or be less inclined to smoke or drink excessive amounts of alcohol.
Yeah.
We also know that animal source fats like butter and foods like red meat, I mean, we see the same problems in the epidemiology regarding those kinds of foods where, we've been told for decades that butter is unhealthy, that red meat is unhealthy. So the epidemiologic literature does seem to show that people who eat more red meat are also more likely to smoke, they're more likely to be overweight, sedentary, et cetera. So the observational literature, I think, is not all that trustworthy. And the randomized control trials are a little bit all over the place. They tend to be short term, and they tend to primarily focus on these, again, surrogate markers as opposed to, hard clinical outcomes.
Yeah, I also appreciate that point about not over-interpreting LDL-C as a surrogate marker for health. I don't know if you come across Nick Norwitz. He's done an interesting N of 1 experiment where he consumed Oreo cookies and actually was able to drop his, albeit very high starting point of cholesterol measured in his blood, massively by consuming more Oreo cookies and actually having an isocaloric diet. And that kind of was a bit like a real eye-opener for me, because I think I am probably guilty of over-interpreting studies based on a surrogate marker that is as impactful as LDL-C. So I think that's a really important point to remember whenever interpreting any study, regardless of whether we're looking at something that is sort of universally agreed as healthy, like nuts and seeds, for example, or something that is as controversial as a seed oil, and also the sort of anti-inflammatory effects of seed oils. And also, I think within this whole category of seed oils, there are different qualities, and I'm not too sure if these studies actually made sure to account for that. So there are cold pressing extraction methods for some sorts of sunflower oils that I guess would maintain the vitamin E content of the actual seed that is kept within the oil versus some of the IBD oils that are refined and then they're deodorized, etc., that might actually strip the vitamin E component, which is actually having a beneficial anti-inflammatory. I mean, this is just, I'm just hypothesizing here. I don't actually have any evidence for either way, but I think it's important to have that conversation as to why people might be sort of fearful enough to take a pragmatic approach and avoid them until we have further evidence to say they're beneficial.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said earlier, seed oils are not a monolith. So sesame seed oil is great. Because to make sesame seed oil, all you're doing is you're pressing the sesame seeds, and that's a culinary oil that's been used for centuries in Japanese cuisine. So it's important not to get mired in dogma and to be able to think more, in a more nuanced way. And I think that's unfortunately often lost, in social media today. It's kind of a bummer. But going back to the over interpretation of studies that tend to find, like, for example, a reduced like LDL-C. It's worth noting that infants that are breastfed versus infants that are formula fed, infants that are breastfed tend to have higher LDL-C. Does that mean that formula is healthier than breast milk? I don't think so. Like, who would agree with that?
Yeah.
So it's important not to become ideologically captured, and to not make LDL this deity, that we are blindly, low LDL levels that we are blindly chasing. I think I'm not saying that LDL is not important. I'm not saying that high LDL is good. I'm saying that it needs to be viewed within context.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think, some of the association studies are hijacked by certain influencers online to suggest that the increased consumption of seed oils over the last 50 years associated with high rates of cardiometabolic disease, obesity, dementia, etc., is enough evidence to suggest that we should be removing all seed oils from our diet. And I think that's just like a conflation of the evidence. And I think that's way over interpreting an association, which doesn't necessarily have that causative element, which I know that you understand, but a lot of people online would not understand that. So there's an important nuance and an important distinction to make within all of these studies, regardless if they're demonstrating a benefit of seed oils or something to the contrary.
Amen. Awesome. Yeah, well said.
So what kind of seed oils do you actually use? So you mentioned sesame oil. Do you use any others?
I don't use any. I try to because I think it's important to be transparent. I see a lot of like nutrition, quote unquote, experts on social media who, I've actually seen this because I try to. Here's the thing about nutrition controversies. I think it's always really important. This is what I try to do on my podcast and in my work. I try to steelman. I always try to steelman the opposing argument.
Yeah.
To try to understand it as best I can.
Yeah.
And
it's a good strategy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I pay attention. I don't engage publicly in controversy because I think that's fruitless. But I see a lot of people who will, publicly claim that, for example, organic is a scam. Like literally they'll say that.
Yeah.
But then you go to their stories and they'll, sometimes they'll reveal their like weekly shopping hauls and they buy organic. So I'm like, why are you spending any money whatsoever on organic if you believe it's a scam? It's just a misalignment of values and action and or the sort of public advocacy. And so I don't use any seed oils. I use primarily extra virgin olive oil. And I use avocado oil sometimes when I'm cooking at higher temperatures. And then, now it's become sort of commonplace for restaurants here in the US, at least. Like some are excusing seed oils entirely and are now like making, for example, French fries or chips, as you call them, right? Like in tallow. And I'll seek those out. I will, because I'm more comfortable in a restaurant eating French fries or chips that have been fried in a more chemically stable fat like tallow. I'm not saying tallow is a health food, but I'd rather that than, consume fries that have been fried in, soybean oil or one of these fats that have just been sitting in the fryer all day. Yeah. Because I poll my audience, and a lot of my, people who follow me have worked in restaurants, and they say they'll claim that, in restaurants, often the oils in these fryers aren't changed for days, sometimes weeks. They're strained, maybe filtered, but they're not fully changed. and that's dangerous. I mean, you're exposing yourself to these mutagenic compounds, aldehydes and the like. So, but yeah, at home it's primarily extra virgin. I mean, you've been in my kitchen.
Yeah.
The only oil that's out is extra virgin olive oil.
Is an extra virgin olive oil, and it's in a bottle that is completely encapsulated, so there's no light that's getting in there. It's at a cool temperature, so you're taking care of your oil as best you can. We have similar oil profiles in terms of my preference, so I will use extra virgin olive oil. That's cold pressed and usually has a high polyphenol count. I always make sure to see whether they've actually gone the extra mile and done an independent lab test, because I think that's a marker of like a transparent company. I don't know if you tried Blueprint, Brian Johnson's brand. I tried that oil. It's way too bitter for me. So they've gone the other direction where they've gone like super high in terms of the polyphenols, but I actually think that can be at the detriment of taste. So I like to keep a balance there. I use sesame oil. I'll use avocado oil. I tend not to have any other oils in my kitchen. I have used rapeseed oil before because there is a brand in the UK where they use like a cold pressed method to extract the oil, and I don't have too many concerns about that, but it's not my primary oil. When I'm out, if I'm going to be eating French fries, I know that there's going to be advanced glycemic end products. It's not a healthy meal, refined starches. They probably whacked in some extra starches in there, potato starch, whatever. I'm just going to lean into it. And I don't know whether the extra oil, we don't even have beef tallow chips in the UK yet. I'm sure it's coming. I don't know if there's enough evidence for me to suggest seeking out those chips or fries, you call them, for me to qualify to myself at least that like this is actually having a measurable impact on my health. So I'm a bit more laissez-faire than you about that. But I think it's important to be transparent because even though I'm not of the opinion that there is enough human evidence to suggest that seed oils are harmful, I still avoid them. So there's probably a bias at the back of my mind where I'm a bit pragmatic, where I tend not to consume them because I'm sort of on the fence. So
yeah. I mean, I think it's important always to remind people that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Sure.
And that's where the precautionary principle, I think, plays a role. And at the end of the day, French fries are still French fries. Like you overconsume French fries. They're calorie dense. They're prone to overconsumption. So I'm not fooling myself, and I don't eat them very often. But I would rather eat them having been fried in tallow, or even more ideally, an unsaturated fat like extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. I'm glad we had this conversation. This is
Same.
good. I like this about seed oils because it's one of those things that can either divide opinion or it can actually bring people together if they see the other person's opinion side. So that's great. Let's talk about something else that's controversial. Soy.
Soy.
So in the form of, we already talked about soy in the form of soybean oil. So we'll take that out of the conversation, but tofu, tempeh, there's a lot of chatter online about how these are feminizing. The phytoestrogens can mess up our hormones. This isn't something that we should be using as a primary source of protein. What's your take on that?
There is this, I think, longstanding myth that soy is feminizing because of the isoflavones in soy that have weak estrogenic properties. But I think that the randomized literature doesn't bear out that soy is in fact feminizing. And I think that soy can be a great additive source of protein. It's very high on the quality scale. It's high. I believe soy is like the highest in terms of its quality as a plant protein. My go-to for protein tends to be animal source proteins. Mm-hmm. So I tend to reach for, beef, chicken, eggs, fish, things like that. But I'm not afraid of soy. Like I enjoy edamame, which I think is a fantastic food. Mm. I don't buy tofu. I don't eat it often, but I'm not afraid of it. There was an interesting study that came out a couple of years ago that compared in the post-workout setting the anabolic response of soy protein to whey protein. And it seemed like the soy protein did have it didn't have as strong of an anabolic signal. I believe they looked at the post-exercise testosterone spike.
Oh, right.
I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this. But when you zoom out and you look at plant protein consumers, when people who are on plant-based diets consume enough protein, when they consume adequate protein, they don't seem to be limited in terms of their muscle growth compared to omnivores. So it's not something that I'm really all that concerned about. I just, my go-to as an omnivore when trying to prioritize the most nutrient-dense protein sources that I can, soy is not generally something that I'm reaching for, but I'm also not afraid of it.
Yeah. I like that opinion. And I share the same opinion on soy. I think as a proportion of the protein that I consume every week, it's probably a larger proportion than yours. And that's primarily because I'm looking at some of the other potential benefits of cardiovascular health. It's got a good amount of fiber in, the isoflavones that you alluded to, the phytoestrogens. There's a potential impact on mitigating cancer risk as well. I think there's a myth that, it is pro-cancerous, but actually the evidence shows that it's anti-cancerous, particularly for women as well. There may be some bone mineral density benefits as well, potentially because of the protein, but also because of those isoflavones. And then in Asian studies, because they contain microbes that are equal producers, there seems to be some benefits for menopausal symptoms as well. Mild, but enough to demonstrate significance in some of these studies. So I think for those reasons, it's part of my diet. I can understand some of the rationale for avoidance. There's the processing argument, because you do need to process, particularly when you're consuming something like tofu, you do need to process it from the soybean itself. You need to have some additives to it, but there are better additives that you can find that are minimally processed. And often, particularly with this wave of vegan foods, a lot of soy products are poorly sourced. So there's GMO soy and there's inorganic soy. And then also they're combined with emulsifiers and flavorings, and because tofu is pretty bland, let's be honest. Unless you put loads of flavor into it, it's not going to taste great. So when you buy those ready-made products, that's not great. That's basically an ultra-processed food, which is going to be damaging for your microbes and et cetera. So I can understand sort of the rationale for avoiding those products, but I usually go for the whole thing. And then there are so many different ways in which you can utilize it.
Yeah, I would say that I don't fear it. I don't prioritize it, but I definitely consume some soy. I mean, I think that natto is one of the healthiest foods you can eat. I think natto is incredible. The more I learn about natto, the more I'm like, I should be eating this stuff every day.
Yeah. Explain what natto is to folks who haven't come across this.
So natto, it's a Japanese dish. It's usually used as a garnish. I don't know I don't think it's used as a main dish. It's used, people will consume small amounts of it, but yeah, it's frequently consumed in Japan, in Okinawa, one of the parts of the world where people tend to live a long time. I hesitate to use the term blue zone because I think blue zones are a bit of a scam, honestly. Yeah. But no, natto. It's a fermented soybean dish, and it's the top source. It's loaded with vitamin K2.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a menaquinone, which is a really powerful vitamin that helps to regulate calcium in the body. It helps to maintain calcium homeostasis, and there's some other there's really cool literature on vitamin K2, which tends to be underconsumed today. It's also a fantastic source of nattokinase, which is a really interesting compound that's being studied in the setting of longevity. It's sort of it's like it breaks down proteins like scar tissue and stuff like that. I don't know. There's a whole body of literature on nattokinase, and I've only just started to scratch the surface, but really powerful stuff there. And then spermidine is another one of these powerful longevity compounds that is abundant in natto. So
I didn't realize spermidine was in natto.
Yeah, I think it's a major source. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, spermidine was first identified in, well, you can kind of interpret from the name, But they've also found it in food. I think wheat bran is another major source of spermidine. So spermidine supplements might, oftentimes they're not gluten-free because they're derived from wheat, but I think it's also very abundant in natto. So yeah, there's a lot going on in natto. It's a really interesting food.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had natto, I was in Japan. This was 10 years ago when I was living in Sydney, and I traveled to Japan. It was only 7 or 8 hours. and a guy gave it to me with a smile on his face. And I remember just getting the chopsticks and like picking it up. And like fresh natto is like stringy, almost like mozzarella cheese that's melted. And it does not taste great the first time you eat it. It's like smelly socks.
Yeah.
But loads of health benefits.
Loads of health benefits. I think the best way that I've found to eat it is you just put a little bit of tamari sauce on it, which is another soy-based product, which I also consume. Yeah. I eat my sushi with tamari, and it's very high in protein. With like a tablespoon or two of tamari, you get a couple grams of soy protein. And so you just put a little bit of tamari on natto, and I think it's good. Yeah,
that's great. There's some other benefits of soy as well. I mean, I think one of the biggest concerns is this sort of feminizing effect, and you hear a lot of people within the sort of paleo/carnivore community talking about like, you don't want to have soy because it's going to give you breasts and it's going to give you gynecomastia and all the rest of it, and it's going to make you infertile. But those studies really came from animal studies, so rodent studies, where they gave super physiological doses of soy, and it was literally the supplemental form of soy isoflavones. At like 30 times higher a dose than we would ever have in a typical serving of tofu. So, and they were giving them to pregnant rats as well. So there's a whole bunch of issues and considerations. And I think if you gave that kind of phytochemical, a plant chemical in those doses of multiple things that we know are healthy, like sulfurous compounds in cruciferous vegetables, you're going to have a detrimental effect. There's going to be goitrogenic effects, there's going to be thyroid effects, there's going to be procancerous effects. So it's just something to sort of bear in mind whenever you see people showing studies online that give a sort of like sense of authority, or actually they're quoting animal-based studies. And whilst those are important, certainly to inform mechanistic opinion, it's not the be-all and end-all, and you really have to look at the human trial evidence. And actually, almost uniformly, the human evidence shows benefits of consuming soy in the diet. So
yeah, and also the fermentation of soy, if I recall correctly, you might know better than I, but reduces in any case those isoflavones.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I always say to people who struggle with consuming beans and legumes in general, there are a few strategies you can use to improve the digestibility of it. One is fermentation, which is why tempeh, which is fermented soybeans or fermented anything, can actually improve the bioavailability of those amino acids and actually makes it slightly more digestible for you. You can soak them for longer and actually pressure cook them for slightly longer, so you actually mash them a little bit more. You can retain a bit of texture, but it just removes some of those troublesome polysaccharides, so the sugars that can be troublesome for people with a certain microbiome profile that is unfavorable to consuming high fiber ingredients like beans and lentils. And then the other thing is spices. So having carnative spices, which is why in Indian cooking we have fennel and cumin and fenugreek. These are actually helping us digest some of these high fiber items. So that can actually improve the digestibility of these ingredients, which is why whenever I make like a tofu scramble, I'll add like spices to it and stuff, and it's just it tastes delicious. It gives flavor to what is otherwise a bland product, and it makes it slightly more digestible as well.
Yeah, it's a great word, carminatives. Like you can literally, I mean, basically what that means is foods that are anti-gas. Ingredients that are anti-gas producing, and fennel is one of them.
Yeah, love that. Awesome. Okay, let's go for another one of your favorites, eggs.
Love them.
Yeah. So arguments against eggs. I mean, there's a lot of fear mongering, I think, around eggs because of the cholesterol component. They are high in cholesterol, but it's a really nutrient dense food. So why don't you talk us through eggs and why you consume them?
Yeah, I think eggs are one of nature's multivitamins. An egg yolk contains a little bit of everything required to grow a brain. And it's no wonder that egg yolks are rich in cholesterol. The brain is rich in cholesterol. The brain, despite making up only 2 to 3% of your body's mass, contains 25% of total body cholesterol. So that's not to say that you need to consume cholesterol for brain health. You absolutely don't. But it's no wonder that egg yolks are rich in cholesterol, because an egg yolk is literally designed by nature to grow a brain. And so it therefore contains a little bit of everything almost essential for brain health. And so I'm a huge fan of eggs. They're the number 2 most abundant source of choline in the diet. The first would be beef liver, which very few people are amenable to, myself included. I'm not a huge beef liver consumer.
I actually quite like liver.
You do?
Yeah, it's weird. Like I like liver and onions and stuff. I don't know whether it is about my palate, but I do like that sort of like gamey, rich flavor.
Oh, the Nando's liver. I'm just now remembering how good liver at Nando's, right? Nando's, yeah.
Yeah, Nando's they do, yeah.
My God. My favorite.
A bit of context, Max is a massive fan of Nando's in the UK. You don't have Nando's here, do you?
No, there's a few there. I think there's one in Chicago. I think there might be one. There's a handful in the United States, but they're not.
You should start a franchise here in LA, man.
I know.
You'd be the number one customer.
So good. But Nando's has this liver dish, if I recall correctly. And I remember I was with you, and I think I ordered like 2 servings of it, and I ate the whole thing.
You loved it.
So good. But yeah, so beef liver is the number 1 source of dietary choline. Mm-hmm. Egg yolks are number 2. And 90% of adults in the United States don't consume the adequate intake for choline, which is really important for brain health. It's important for pregnant women. It's important for everybody. Mm-hmm. Women who are, when pregnant, consume the highest amounts of choline in a specific trimester, I forget which, but seem to have offspring that are cognitively sharper. So it's a really important micronutrient, and eggs are the easiest to consume, easiest to access source of them. The dietary cholesterol, issue, I think for many years it was thought that, based on animal studies, that dietary cholesterol increased blood, serum cholesterol. And we now know that that's not really true in humans. There is a small percentage of people who are hyper responders, mm-hmm. hyper absorbers of dietary cholesterol, but that makes up the minority. There is an effect where, for people who are on plant-based diets, who consume no cholesterol and then start from one day to the next consuming dietary cholesterol, there will be an increase in cholesterol, because there's a bit of a lag time before your liver understands that we've got some cholesterol incoming, but your liver produces most of the cholesterol in your blood. Again, for most people, the dietary cholesterol is not a concern. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of eating eggs. There was even a study, it was an observational study a couple months ago, if not a year ago, that found that egg consumers had a 50% almost risk reduction for Alzheimer's disease. I don't know how much stock I would put in that study. It was an observational study, but I think it's worth mentioning that there doesn't seem to be the signal that eggs increase risk of Alzheimer's. In fact, the signal seems to be the inverse, that mm-hmm. eggs seem to reduce to lower risk. There was mm-hmm. another study that found that in men, the highest consumers of dietary choline over an almost 30-year period had a 30% risk reduction for Alzheimer's disease, regardless of whether or not they carried the ApoE4 allele. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm quite bullish on eggs. I think they're great.
I got my cheat sheet here for the pros around eggs, right? So you've basically mentioned all of them. So high quality protein, about 6 grams per cooked egg. All 9 essential amino acids, vitamins, so B12, even a little bit of vitamin D as well. You got minerals, choline that you've talked about, important for brain development. And actually, when you look at some of the meta-analyses of moderate egg consumption, which is defined as around 1 egg a day, so 7 a week, there doesn't appear to be a consistent association with higher likelihood of stroke and cardiovascular disease. So that's looking across the board at multiple different studies. And then even weight management as well. I think I talked about this on your podcast. When people consume eggs, particularly at breakfast time, there does appear to be an association with improvements in satiety and overall weight management. So you're less likely to overconsume calories in a 24-hour period. So you're less likely to put on weight and maintain good metabolic health. And then eye health as well. So it's also a component of lutein and zeaxanthin, which can be associated with a reduced risk of age-related macular degeneration, which is a real big issue for older adults.
Also, lutein and zeaxanthin, really important for brain health. I broke the news on this in Genius Foods, my first book, but we're now starting to see that it's not just the eyes that benefit from higher levels of lutein and zeaxanthin consumption, that these compounds are directly associated with better cognitive health.
Yeah.
And even randomized control trials show that supplemental lutein and zeaxanthin can also lead to a cognitive boost. And so, yeah, I'm a huge fan of lutein, zeaxanthin, and egg yolks are a great source. I'll add that whole eggs tend to contain, a lot of fat. So, for people looking to optimize protein intake, I think whole eggs are incredible. But something that I do personally is I'll eat 2 to 3 whole eggs, and then I'll mix in a few egg whites just to jack the protein levels even higher. In the United States, at least, it's very easy to buy cartons of pre-separated egg whites. So I'll eat 2 to 3 whole eggs, and I'll put in like 2 to 3 egg whites as well.
That's actually a really good strategy because, aside from the environmental concerns, because I think we should be able to have a nutrition conversation without conflating everything with the environment. Obviously, that is very important, and trying to consume the highest quality eggs that you can buy that are welfare. And there's a real big issue with caged eggs and all the rest of it, caged hens rather. That being said, people can go almost to the extreme and just have like as many eggs as they want every single day, 6 to 8 eggs every single day. Do you think there's an issue with that, given what you said, about eggs being a multivitamin? People might go overboard and be like, oh, I'm going to have as many as I want. Like, it doesn't matter about the cholesterol. It doesn't matter about over-consuming choline. It doesn't matter about any of these other elements that people might be scared of.
I think it's highly individual. I don't think that there's any reason to fear eggs. Nick Norwitz, who you referenced earlier, I think he even did a study where he ate something like, he was eating like 80 eggs a week or some crazy thing like that. He did. I mean, he's known for doing these like extreme N of 1 experiments. So these are anecdotes. Like, you can't read too much into them, but like, he is an MD PhD, and he did do this experiment where he just ate an insane amount of eggs. And if I recall correctly, his cholesterol didn't budge, or maybe it even went down. So it's very individual. And again, there are some hyperabsorbers. So you just need to there are tests that you can do for this, better than I, but where they'll use various phytosterols, and they'll look at levels in the blood because they compete for the same absorption receptors in the gut. So you can always like measure for this, but in general, I would say for most people, eggs are not to be feared, and in fact prioritized.
Yeah. I remember because Nick was on my podcast, we had a conversation about that. His general cholesterol level was really high.
Is it really high? Okay.
Really high. Like, he's one of these lean mass hyper responders.
Maybe not the best example.
So probably not the best cholesterol ratio to aim for. But to your point about hyper responders, I think there are certain genetic tests that you can do. They look at SNPs, looking at, I'm going to butcher the name, it's the Niemann-Pick C1-like-1 transporter, which is responsible for cholesterol balance in the blood. There's also ApoE4, actually, that you were just mentioning. There does appear to be some issue with those genetic SNPs with people who consume more than the moderate intake as well. So for folks who are eating like 6 eggs a day, I would actually have some reservations around that, because you're literally looking at, if you look at a typical egg, it's about 180 milligrams of cholesterol. So you're getting up to 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol. And whilst most cholesterol is just simply excreted throughout the body, there is a degree of cholesterol that you do absorb. And when you hit those extreme levels, I think that's where you're going to fall into the potential pitfall of actually bumping up your serum cholesterol level. And I like to play the numbers, particularly as a medic, that I would be cautious about that. So I think eggs are great as an addition to the diet, but I wouldn't go to the extremes of having as many eggs as you want every single day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's totally reasonable. Yeah, I eat 2 to 3 a day, 2 to 3 whole eggs. And some days I'll skip, but I think at that level, you're likely to be fine. For most people, again.
For most people, yeah. And I think it's always good to titrate your response to anything in your diet that you're consuming to that degree with bloods. And I'm a big fan of bloods these days. I don't think I was, actually, because within my medical career working in the National Health Service, we like to be quite reserved with any investigations. And there's sort of the mantra, if it doesn't change management, don't test. Now I'm sort of altering my opinion on that, and I'm coming around to this idea of actually doing slightly more investigation that might actually reveal some issues and lead to some sort of over investigation, or sort of like, over sort of treating, rather than like just letting things fester until your 50s and 60s, and then you react to something that actually should have been intervened a couple of decades earlier. So,
yeah. Also, I think in nutrition, one thing and this is why nutrition science is so hard to do, but it's like, if you remove those eggs from your diet, then the question becomes, well, what are you replacing them with? Are you removing eggs because you're afraid of the cholesterol, only to then replace that nutrient-rich, albeit high cholesterol breakfast with, commercial cereal loaded with sugar and refined grains
with
and
the
whatnot.
heart healthy sign on it?
With the heart healthy sign on it, yeah. So, you always just have to be, mindful of what you're replacing these foods with if you choose to replace them at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll link to a couple of meta-analyses as well of positions on both sides, actually, about higher egg consumption with higher CVD risk, and then moderate egg consumption with no association between risk as well. But, the thing that I always, like I was alluding to on your podcast, as a medical doctor, I've gone with the guidelines and I've gone against the guidelines, all contextualized by the person sitting in front of me, who I'm treating, who I'm giving advice to. And that's why I think it's just so important to, be informed by some of these big trials and even the observational studies, but also personalize it to your own lifestyle. Because like you were saying, if people become fearful of eggs and they actually start consuming refined sugars, refined starches, then you're actually going to be net negative when it comes to your overall health. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about beef tallow.
Okay.
We're going to go back from seed oils to animal fats. Beef tallow is very popular here. I mean, people are putting it on their skin, putting it on their hair. Like, have you got beef tallow in your hair?
I do not have beef. Yeah, it might look like it. No, that's my own tallow. It's called not shampooing your hair every day.
Which is quite healthy.
Yeah.
I don't shampoo my hair every day. You want the natural oils.
You want the natural, yeah. The idea that men need to shampoo their hair every day, that's a psyop. It's not something that you need to do. When I discovered that hair, so off topic, but you didn't need to do it. It was actually counterproductive to healthy hair to shampoo your hair every day. It was like revelatory to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually use a bit. This is really off topic. I use a tiny bit of coconut oil in my hair.
Oh, cool.
And just like a tiny bit, and then that's it. It just kind of a little bit of like oil to just get things going after I wash it, but otherwise I don't use anything else and just let the natural oil seep in. And
yeah, I like it. It looks great. Great hair.
Thanks, man.
Great head of hair.
It's good mutual hair love here.
Yeah. Tallow. So I'm not a big like tallow fanboy. I'm not like anti, I'm not for. I think the jury is still out because it's so kind of, there's so much hype, and it's a fat that maybe historically we used a lot more frequently. It's certainly not one that I think the nutrition research apparatus has really looked too deeply into in terms of its effect on health. My fear is that because it may, in some or maybe even most, raise LDL compared to seed oils, that it might automatically get the sort of red flag from the nutrition community, the nutrition evidence-based community. But I think that it's a better alternative. And I know this is a controversial statement, but I would rather eat foods that are fried in tallow as compared to these seed oils. Does that mean that I'm chasing tallow? No, but I do think it's interesting, and you brought this up on my podcast. I'm not that familiar with the fatty acid, the various proportions of the differing fatty acids in tallow, but if a significant proportion of it is stearic acid, I know that about half of the fat of beef is actually monounsaturated fat. And then I know that there is a proportion of stearic acid, which is neutral from a cardiovascular standpoint, if not beneficial. So I think the jury's still out, and I'm not going to say it's a health food. I'm not going to say that it's bad for you. But yeah, I think more research is warranted.
I'm going to refer back to my cheat sheet here that I should have shared with you before this, actually, because I think it's really interesting for both of us, because we just talked about the fatty acid breakdown of beef tallow by total fat. And so the reason why I think it gets automatically a red flag is because of the fact that it is 50 to 55% saturated fat. We'll go into exactly how much of the different types of saturated fats there are. But interestingly, the other 40, 45% is monounsaturated fatty acid, a dominant proportion of which is oleic acid. People might recognize that word from olive oil. So oleic acid is actually a monounsaturated fatty acid that we find typically in good quality extra virgin olive oil and other sort of oils as well that you can find that has some cardiovascular protective properties. Now, does that completely exonerate beef tallow from having a cardiovascular risky profile? No, but it is very interesting that it is quite a big proportion is that. And just going back to the saturated fats, and the reason why we're going through these different types of saturated fats is because they have differing impacts on us, and there are different chain lengths for these different saturated fats. So 50% of the saturated fat in beef tallow is stearic acid. Stearic acid is a saturated fat that has been cardio neutral or maybe even cardioprotective. It's the dominant saturated fat that you find in dark chocolate, which we know is beneficial, maybe because of the flavonols and the other polyphenols that you find in chocolate or the theobromine, but it's still interesting to state that. And then palmitic acid is the other big proportion, the other 50% of the saturated fat that you find in beef tallow. That we do know is potentially harmful, probably harmful, does raise LDL-C. So in terms of like whether I would say you need to steer clear from this or whether you can safely use it, I would say you probably can safely use it. Everything comes down to dose. So how much of this tallow are you throwing into your meals? How much is that actually going to be left on your plate? How much of that saturated fat are you going to ultimately be consuming? I think it really comes down to dose. So I would use beef tallow, or I would use ghee, or I'd use extra virgin olive oil, but in the right amounts, because I think the sort of caloric density is probably the biggest issue for most people when it comes to oils and fats in general.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That the dose makes a poison with most anything, and at the end of the day, it is an isolated fat extract, which is going to be highly calorie dense, and there's no necessity for consuming any added fat. Actually, like I this is an area where I've evolved. I think extra virgin olive oil is amazing, and I use it regularly. But I'm very diligent with how I use it because ultimately, a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil has as many calories as a huge whole Honeycrisp apple. So it's not going to be as satiating. It's not going to be, it's just very calorie dense. So, and that goes for any added fat. So you want to be just diligent with how you use it.
It's really interesting. I want to do an N of 1 experiment where I consume 1,000 extra calories every single day from extra virgin olive oil, just to see whether my weight actually shifts. Like I'm really consistent in my weight in that I'm basically 75 kilos. I barely go above or below that, no matter like how different my diet is. Like I'm in LA right now. I just think I just sort of adjust because I have a high protein, high fiber breakfast, as you know. I'd love to see what effect having 1,000 calories from extra virgin olive oil actually has on my weight, because the science makes sense. The science of energy density would state that I'm going to put on X amount of kilos or X amount of pounds per week, per month, the longer I maintain that calorie surplus. But I just can't get my head around how this is going to have this much of an impact given my weight is so stable.
Yeah. There was do you follow Menno Henselmans on social media at all?
I don't. Oh, no, I think I do. Yeah. Is this a Nordic guy? The Swedish?
Yes. Yeah. He's a professional bodybuilder, fitness coach, and nutrition. I think he's in the process of getting his nutrition PhD. I could be wrong there, or exercise science, something like that. But he shares a lot of really interesting research. And he did share a study recently that found that, it was a small study, and it's like, these are not studies to be overinterpreted, but it was a study that looked at extra virgin olive oil in like an overfeeding setting. And it was like the results were very counterintuitive. Like they fed like lots of extra virgin olive oil to these poor subjects. And they didn't gain the weight that you would expect them to gain based on the calories that they were consuming from oil. Similar to the discussion that we had on my podcast about protein. It's like overfeeding lean protein doesn't seem to promote the kind of weight gain that you would expect to see from feeding an isocaloric dose of, for example, starch or sugar or whatever, or fat.
Yeah. I think it's something to do with the absorption of these ingredients. So if you're eating like a really nutrient-dense protein source, how much of those calories are going to be used to burn and metabolize and assimilate those proteins within that ingredient versus how much of the total ingredient you're actually absorbing, how much of it is going to just pass right through you. There's a really interesting study actually that I discussed with Dr. Sarah Berry, who you've had in your podcast as well, where they actually did a study where they demonstrated that depending on the food matrix of a nut, even when the calories were kept the same, the difference in calories absorbed varied from person to person massively. and according to how different the food was, whether it's like a pureed almonds, ground almonds, or whole almonds, because the fiber and all the other structures that go into how you absorb the energy is all being disrupted and changed. So it's really interesting. I don't think it can be down to like a mathematical equation, which is commonly what you see touted online.
No, 100%. Yeah, it's like how rapidly you consume the whole nut, like how many, the size of the particles that you swallow determines how much energy you're able to extract from them and its transit through the digestive tract. It's very interesting science, and that's why, you know, people will argue, and there is some truth to the argument that calorie counting is kind of reductionist. Ultimately, I think it can be helpful, and it does work for many, many people. But yeah, you know, I think all these kinds of studies are just really interesting and increasing our knowledge around how food impacts us from myriad vantage points.
There is a commonality that I see with people who are really big fans of calorie counting. They tend to be super jacked and super ripped. And the reason why is because they put this science down to a T on their own diet, and they see the benefits. They work with clients, they do the same thing, and they see this happening like time and time again. When you fix exactly what they're consuming, exactly the ingredients that they want to consume with the calories, this is what the outcome looks like. And I don't deny that, but I think within this, there's so much nuance, and we're dealing with biology here, not machines, and we're all going to react very, very differently.
Yeah, I've done it. I've calorie counted because
you got really ripped. I remember.
Yeah. Well, the reality is, like, you shouldn't need to calorie count to maintain a healthy weight. But we're not talking about when looking at bodybuilders, we're not necessarily talking about a healthy weight. Where bodybuilding, we need to parse that from health because they're two different goals. I mean, it might feel great and look great. It doesn't even necessarily feel great to be ripped, but yeah, like you can't guess your way to, like, you can not calorie count and be 10 to 12% body fat as a male, but you can't really. It's counterproductive to try to guess your way to 9, 8, 7, 6% body fat like these bodybuilders are doing. They need to be really diligent to make sure that the calorie deficits that they're entering into are not too extreme because they don't want to risk muscle loss. They want to make sure, like, you have to be dialed in to a certain point when you get that lean, because you want to make sure that you're eating enough fat for hormone synthesis, that you're, you know, eating enough protein to maintain your muscles. So when I did it, I had, you know, without calorie counting, dieted down to about a 10% body fat, but I wanted to get into the single digits.
Oh, wow.
And I did briefly. I'm not like a competitive bodybuilder, but it was very helpful for me to begin to calorie count at that level.
Totally.
You just can't guess yourself into single digit body fat and do it in the most efficient, effective way to also preserve your lean mass.
How are you measuring your fat percentage? Was it with calipers, or were you doing DEXA or?
Not DEXA. I've never done DEXA because I've just never had the opportunity to, but also there's like a dose of radiation that, you know, I just didn't want. So I was using the bioelectrical impedance, like those things. And I don't know, there's debate about their accuracy, but just as a reference point, I think those can be helpful. And so, yeah, I was just tracking myself. I went from like 14 all the way down to like 8, I think. 8%. Yeah.
Wow, that's lean.
Yeah, it was the leanest I'd ever been. And I could have kept going, actually, but I just was like, it wasn't really for any point other than just to see what it's like to be that ripped and to see what it takes. And yeah, and I found at a certain point, calorie counting became, I think, really crucial. But not, you don't, you know, again, that's not for health. Like, you don't need to be single digit body fat to be in optimal health.
Yeah.
For a male, optimal body fat percentages range from, I think it's 10 to 20%. I think maybe 15 to 25% women, although it actually might be a little bit higher than that. I don't recall. Yeah. Specifically for women, women tend to carry more body fat. But it was definitely an interesting journey. But I saw the merit of it for that goal. You know?
Yeah. I don't know if you had your blood work done for hormones and stuff. Like, did you check your?
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Really,
my testosterone basically tanked.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I mean, to be expected at that level, right?
I was eating a lot less fat because fat is the most calorie dense. So you want to reduce your fat intake. And so, yeah, my testosterone is actually typically very high. It's like surprisingly high when I tell most people, because I'm 43. Just about a year or two ago, it was like in the 1100s.
Okay, wow.
And yeah, I don't know if that converts. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Units.
That's super high, dude.
Yeah. And now it's, I think, like 900, 8 to 900.
Okay.
But when I was cutting, it got down to like, I don't know, it was like 600, 600, which is low for me.
Which is low for you, but it's still relatively okay.
Yeah,
actually.
it's okay. Yeah.
It's
but I
not
saw
too bad. But you
mine,
saw a massive drop. That's like
mine has
50%.
always been consistently high.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. And that's what I mean. Did you feel differently as well? Like, did you feel sluggish or low? Like,
I didn't feel my best. Your body, it's called metabolic adaptation, or I think that's the term.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, your body thinks that it's starving to death. And so there are all these adaptations that kick in, like a reduction in NEAT, which is the sort of subconscious, maybe it's fidgeting. You just have less energy to do stuff. Your body goes into like this like conservation mode.
Yeah. So
it was not the most comfortable place to be, but it wasn't that bad either, and you look great. So
yeah, trade-offs there.
Yeah, trade-offs. Yeah, I was like the
yeah.
most vascular I'd ever been. I actually looked kind of like a bodybuilder.
Oh, there you go.
For the first time in my life. Yeah, and it was awesome. I mean, it was a great, fantastic experiment. I was thinking about doing it again because I've put on more muscle in the time since then. But yeah, I think that's around the time that when we first met. I think that was in the middle of that, or I was maybe just coming out of it, but that was around the time that I was like very lean.
It's really interesting how your body adapts to this. Like you just mentioned, NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is, it represents something massive, like 10 to 15% of your total caloric burn every single day. And just to clarify what that is for the audience, this is the amount of calories that you burn from doing a lot of what I do. I'm very like expressive with my hands. I'm always fidgeting. My wife always complains about it, but I'm always like adjusting myself in my seat. And so what you would have noticed is your natural fidgeting would have gone down because your body is like, hey, we're not getting any fuel in here. So we're going to shut down anything that is not, necessary for survival, which means you're going to sit down in that chair. You're not going to get up. We're not going to go for a walk. Everything is geared towards you just staying in bed. And that's it. And it goes from everything from your mood to the way your body reacts and all that kind of stuff, which is why I think when people cut calories, particularly when they go beyond like that 10%, which is typically what people tend to go for, they feel horrible.
Yeah.
Even in the short term, they feel terrible. It's because your body is very, very geared towards maintaining calories and maintaining your sense of homeostasis, whatever that is for you in that moment. And so you will feel it. And you've got to go beyond that if you're, particularly if you're a bodybuilder, you're trying to go for those single digit fat numbers.
Yeah. I mean, there are ways to compensate. You can jack up your carbs a little bit, but yeah, you feel slower. You definitely feel slower. But there are these compensatory feelings because like you're the leanest you've ever been. You just feel lighter.
Yeah.
Also. And then you can work in these psychological tools like refeeds, which are often utilized in the bodybuilding space, which primarily are just like psychological boosts so that you can keep dieting. But yeah, I mean, there's merit to the sport, if you want to call it that. I guess it is a sport, and I have a lot of respect for bodybuilders. I've always actually been into bodybuilding. I've never considered, or I approach my exercise as a bodybuilder, but I've never aspired to actually compete or anything like that. I just don't have the genes for it. But I think there's a lot to be learned from there. Actually, like the science, I've had Bill Campbell on my podcast, who's an exercise scientist, PhD, and it's like, it is interesting when you hear the exercise science community, they're often like, they respond often to what is sometimes called the quote unquote bro science. Bodybuilders will figure stuff out on their own in the trenches, and then like science comes in to kind of validate those findings or those observations. And it's interesting. There's a lot to be learned about our bodies, about physiology from that world.
100%, man. I mean, like when I started even thinking about doing my latest book, Healthy High Protein, I lent into a lot of that bro science, and then B, a lot of the scientists sort of like dispelling some myths, but some of the stuff that actually came from people tinkering with protein supplements and BCAAs and like all the, and obviously testosterone and other illegal hormone drugs, actually, it has paved the way for a lot of learning that can be applied to people as they age, the longevity community, postmenopausal issues. Like, there's actually a lot that we can learn from this community. And I really respect, I think, a lot of the exercise physiologists, because they understand the science like a lot better than I did, even when I was learning this stuff at med school, and from some endocrinologists that are like at the top of their game. Like, they understand the hormonal milieu just as well as some of these folks.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it. That's why I'm so inspired by like what we do. I just think it's such a fascinating field to be in. It's so fun too. It's like it's so applicable to like everyday life. On the one hand, health is crucially important, like long-term health. But on the other hand, when it comes to optimizing how you feel and perform and even look, which impacts your confidence and your mental health, that's where the applied science of exercise physiology, nutrition, all play a really important role.
Absolutely. Let's talk finally about a fun one. Raw milk.
Oh man.
I feel like these are all coming from America. Like, I've been here for a couple of weeks now, and I've just seen on the news like people talking about seed oils, people talking about raw milk, people talking about tallow. Like, let's talk about raw milk. What is the deal with raw milk?
Yeah. So wow, you really decided to step in it with this episode of your show. Yeah, I would probably position myself in the middle again, like with the tallow controversy. With raw milk, there are a lot of people who, will claim that raw milk is that so many people have difficulty digesting dairy because it's been pasteurized, that a lot of the enzymes that are required for the digestion of milk are degraded in the pasteurization process, which heats dairy up to a certain temperature in order to kill potentially pathogenic bacteria. I think if you know the farm where you're getting your dairy from and it's raw and that's what you choose to drink, then all good. I'm not like anti-raw dairy. Obviously, there is some risk there, but there's risk with consuming any raw food. Like, that's where I think the polarity in this debate is actually quite silly. It's like, you wouldn't eat raw beef that you just buy from the supermarket. Like, who would do that? On the other hand, plenty of people enjoy raw beef. There's carne cruda, there's carpaccio, there's all kinds of delicacies that involve raw beef, or raw fish. Like, I wouldn't go to the fish section of my supermarket and buy a piece of raw salmon fillet and start eating it as if it were sushi from Nobu. Like, you have to know where your food is coming from, And so similarly with raw milk, I think like there just needs to be caution around it. And if you live near a farm or if you have access to one of these producers here in California, there's a great producer, no affiliation, called Raw Farms, I think they're called. Very easy to access. I think it's great. On the other hand, I also think that pasteurized dairy is great. It's a fantastic source of micronutrients like calcium, magnesium, probiotics, and of course protein. So there's this polarity where some in the raw milk community will say that pasteurized dairy is basically useless or it's poison, and that's just nonsense. But on the other hand, I think if you have access to a raw dairy farm, there's no significant risk of harm if you know where it's coming from. Beyond the harm that would, or the risk that would be imparted from consuming anything raw. Yeah. That you're not necessarily growing yourself or harvesting or whatever yourself. So I consume, I would say for me personally, most of the dairy that I consume is pasteurized. And I'm fine with it. Fantastic, easily accessible source of protein. I'm not gonna just go to any supermarket and buy, raw dairy. I would want to know where it's coming from. And yeah.
This is why I like talking to you, man, because, the analogy you just used there, I think paints a very positive picture for people who might have been really like anti-raw dairy, but still go to Nobu. I've actually never been to Nobu. I really want to go. I heard there's a really good Nobu in LA, right? Yeah, the original one. But great. Would go and eat sushi, would go and have beef tartare, would go and have, something else that's raw and whatever. but they're really anti-raw milk because of, the potential for pathogens and salmonella. And, these are valid concerns. And actually, there is evidence that people who consume poorly handled raw dairy are at greater risk of some of these quite serious gastrointestinal illnesses that you need to be aware of. But in the same way, foodborne illnesses can come from things like alfalfa sprouts.
Exactly.
Poorly handled with E. coli, or where they don't have proper irrigation systems. So anything that you're consuming raw definitely has risks, including a salad. Am I pro raw dairy? Do I think the benefits of raw dairy outweigh the potential risks? Probably not, which is why I would prefer to get my milk pasteurized. I also don't have access to a farm that is properly producing raw dairy where I can potentially have or experience some of those benefits that may be, more enzymes, more probiotics, maybe a favorable picture for my microbiota. There are some studies that show that, you have a more diverse microbiome when you consume raw dairy. But having said that, my dad grew up on a farm in Punjab in India. My mum also comes from a similar region. When we visit there, we have cows. We drink raw dairy. We culture the butter. We, turn that into yogurt. There's no pasteurization process there. It's, just straight from the cow. Like, I know that we've cleaned the cow, we've cleaned the udder, all the rest of it. So we've done everything we can to minimize any infection risk. And that's very small scale, but I don't have access to that to the UK. Would I have much of a problem? Probably not, actually. Having said that.
No, 100%. I think it's just the polarity. It's like going back to the seed oil conversation. It's like people are either like fully for or against it. And it's like, no, nuance, context. Like if you have access to a farm where you know where the dairy is coming from, then I think all good, have at it. But on the other hand, we shouldn't demonize one of the many benefits of industrial food production. There's a lot of risks and harms that come with industrial food production as well. But one of the benefits is that dairy is, pasteurized dairy is a pretty legitimate. It's a fail-safe. I mean, it's like it's safe. It's typically very safe and highly nutrient dense source of protein for most people. And, observationally, when you look at people who consume dairy, like there seems to be an anti-inflammatory effect for people who are not sensitive to it. There are all these benefits to regularly consuming dairy, provided you can digest it, that you're not sensitive or have an allergy. So I'm for pasteurized dairy. And if you know where your raw dairy is coming from and you choose to indulge in raw dairy, then go for it. I don't know of any, I will say that I haven't seen anything too convincing to make me believe that raw dairy has any, significant benefit over pasteurized dairy.
Yeah.
But I know that its advocates do believe that there are benefits, and so I think that we should do research to validate, those claims.
Yeah.
Validate or
dismiss.
Yeah. I was going to say debunk, but debunk is like aggressive. Yeah. Dismiss.
Yeah. It's why I wanted to call this episode discussing nutrition controversies rather than nutrition myths, because I think the word myth and the word debunking suggests that there is a correct and incorrect opinion, where actually, as we've demonstrated in today's conversation, there's a whole bunch of gray and there's a whole bunch of nuance. And I think it takes people who might even have differing opinions on the same subject to actually come together and discuss the pros and cons, or the advantages and disadvantages, or, the science for or against, whilst also appreciating the absence of evidence and people's personal opinions and personal biases and personal preferences.
Amen. Yeah, super important. I think, almost every area of life would be well suited to welcome back, more nuance, more context, more understanding. There are so many domains today that have just become so polarized. I think social media plays into that in no small part because of the way the algorithms work. But all of these topics, I mean, these are all they're all complicated topics that I think warrant and deserve to be talked about with more nuance and understanding. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Epic, man. This is great. I really loved it. Look, you've been doing this thing for a while now. I want to end this conversation by asking, what's the biggest thing that you've changed your mind on?
Man, well, there's a few areas. I would say an area where I've changed my mind.
Yeah, I've hit you with a big question right at the end, man. Sorry. After we've been chatting for like over an hour.
No, I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. What do you think about that? Nothing, man. I've been right about everything. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. A few things. I mean, I guess like, you know, I used to be very, I used to not eat like gluten containing foods. But I have since, you know, realized that like sourdough bread is an incredible food and I eat that regularly. I think years ago, I had kind of swallowed some of the wellness dogma that does tend to demonize foods like dairy. I think dairy is a wonderful food group. I don't really, I think that there's value to low carb and even ketogenic diets in the right context for the right person. But I personally, like, I pay zero attention to like the carbohydrate content of my diet. I try to prioritize high quality sources of carbohydrates, whole food sources of carbohydrates. But in general, like I'm not like a, you know, carb, like I'm not really interested in like the diet wars with regards to like low carb versus low fat. Like I don't really care about that anymore. And yeah, I think like for most people need to focus primarily on the big rocks. Like all of this granular stuff is really interesting for people who, you know, who are nutrition nerds like you and I. But at the end of the day, most people, like when you zoom out and you look at actual population health, I think the problems are very clear and the solutions are not as complex as they often are made out to appear on social media. We live in a time where 60% of the calories that your average adult consumes in the United States are from ultra-processed foods, essentially vending machine foods. In the UK, you're doing a little bit better, 50%. But I think those are the big rocks. Like, how can we get people to eat a little bit more whole foods, you know, whole plants, steak, eggs, things like that, as opposed to, again, the vending machine foods? How can we get them to be a little bit more active, to resistance train a little bit more frequently, to maybe, you know, drink less alcohol, to get better sleep, to reduce their stress. So I'm these days I'm primarily trying to focus more on those big picture variables.
Absolutely, man. Amen. Appreciate you, man. Where can people find you? You got Genius Kitchen, which is a bestseller, and you got Genius Life, and like obviously we're in your studio right now, so you listen to your podcast.
Look at these two tall drinks of water right here. Look at that.
They look good together.
We got our cookbooks. Yeah, you've got a little bit more height than I do. It's making me a little bit. I'm just
compensating for my lack of height in real life.
Maybe that's, I don't know, but it's making me, from where I sit a little intimidated. You've got a beautiful book out, and so I've got 3 books out. The Genius Trilogy. My first book, Genius Foods, is a nutrition deep dive into how to care for your brain as you age and how to boost mental health using tools given to us by this burgeoning field known as nutritional psychiatry. Super exciting stuff. And then if you're into cooking, which I'm assuming a lot of your listeners are, I put out my own cookbook about 3 years ago called Genius Kitchen. And it's recipes all catered to optimizing brain health in particular. And, you know, body health, metabolic health, all that stuff. But I'm really interested, I would say, primarily in the prevention of neurodegenerative diseases, because that's what my mom had. And so I've got my books out. And then my podcast is called The Genius Life. And it's available on all podcast platforms and YouTube. Yeah.
And I want to give a little plug for your film as well. Little Empty Boxes should be on a streaming platform. I really want that to happen, but you know, you can go check it out at littleemptyboxes.com, I think it is.
That should work, or
just Google it.
You could just Google Little Empty Boxes. But it's a documentary. It's about my mom. It's about dementia prevention. It's for anybody who's ever had a loved one with dementia. It's a film that'll make you feel a little bit less alone. and make you realize that a lot of people are going through this. So
yeah, man.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Appreciate
Thank you. Thanks, dude. This was fun.
If you loved that episode, you will love the full library of podcasts from the Doctor's Kitchen Library. We talk about everything from inflammation, supplements, and food as medicine. Just like this episode right here. You can click it right now and check it out.